In the year 1220 AD, the world was holding its breath. That was not a figure of speech, it was literal. Entire cities vanished from the map. Rivers changed their course under the weight of countless bodies, and a civilization 5 centuries old was crumbling like a sandcastle before a wave the likes of which history had never seen. His name was Genghis Khan, the man who transformed the Mongols from scattered tribes warring over water and pasture into the greatest war machine in human history. A man said to have killed so many people that he reduced the entire population of the earth by 10%. A man whose victims, if gathered together in a single city, would have made it the largest city on Earth in the 21st century. And yet, someone stood against him, not for a week, not for a month, but for years, and made him, for the first time in his life, retreat. His name was Jalal al-Din Mingburnu, the last Sultan of Khwarazm, the prince who refused to kneel, the man who fought the Mongols without an army, without a state, without a homeland, and left historians hesitating before passing judgment. Was he a hero, a reckless adventurer, or was he simply the only man of his age who understood that dignity is worth dying for? This is not merely a piece about 2 or 3 battles. This is the complete dossier. 2 hours in the depths of one of the most gripping and harrowing chapters in the history of humanity. Come with me.
Let's go back to the beginning first, because nothing in history can be understood without its context. At the dawn of the 13th century AD, the Khwarazmian Empire was one of the greatest Islamic powers on the face of the earth. It stretched from the Caspian Sea in the west to the borders of India in the east, and from the Aral Sea in the north to the Arabian Gulf in the south. Within its embrace lay legendary cities: Samarkand, the bride of Central Asia, whose markets, historians wrote, never slept; Bukhara, the city of scholarship, jurisprudence, and literature, where Avicenna was raised, where Greek philosophy was translated and reborn; Urgench, the capital, the beating heart of the empire, and city of academies, libraries, and world trade; Merv, said to have held 1 million souls, counted among the greatest cities in the world. And at the head of it all stood Sultan ad-Din Muhammad II of Khwarazm, a man who reached the pinnacle of his glory after defeating the Sultan of Ghor and annexing his lands, a man whom the Abbasid Caliph, however grudgingly, titled the Second Alexander, a man who commanded an army numbering, according to Islamic sources such as Ibn al-Athir and Juvaini, between 400,000 and 500,000 fighters. But accumulated victory breeds something dangerous in the souls of rulers. It breeds illusion, the illusion that the world will go on in this fashion, the illusion that the coming enemy will be like the enemies of the past. And it was precisely this illusion that dwelled in the soul of Sultan Muhammad at the very moment the name Genghis Khan began to pass from lip to lip. But before we reach that pivotal moment, we need to understand who the other man in this equation was. In the vast steppes north of the great desert of Central Asia, around the year 1166 AD, a child was born into the Borjigin Mongol clan, clutching in his hand at birth a clot of blood, which the Mongols took as an omen that he would be a warrior. They named him Temujin. His childhood was not a tale of kings, it was a tale of survival. When he was 9 years old, his father was poisoned and killed by enemies from the Tatar tribe. His family was left to perish on the frozen steppe. No tribe would take him in. He had no protection. He had nothing but rage, intelligence, and will. For years, Temujin lived on the edge of death. He was captured once, his neck locked in a wooden slave collar. He escaped more than once, and in every battle he lost, he learned a lesson no one else did. He learned that narrow tribalism is a double-edged sword. It binds you to your own people, but it walls you off from everyone else. And that a man who could break through that barrier, who could take fierce warriors from every tribe and bind their loyalty to him personally, not to bloodline, that man would never be conquered. And so Temujin began to build, slowly, shrewdly, without mercy at times, with absolute loyalty at others. In the year 1206 AD, the Mongol chieftains gathered at a Kurultai, the great tribal council, and proclaimed Temujin Genghis Khan, Khan of Khans, ruler of the world. But this title was not an empty honor, it was a program. Genghis Khan began to prove he deserved the name in a way the world had never seen. First, his armies annihilated the Tatar tribes who had killed his father to the last soul. Second, he defeated the Jin Empire and subjugated northern China. Third, he crushed the Uyghurs and the Karakitai and arrived at the borders of the Islamic world. And in the year 1218 AD, Genghis Khan sent Sultan Mehmed of Khwarazm a great trade caravan, 450 merchants carrying goods said to be of immense value. With it came a message: "You are the ruler of the West, and I am the ruler of the East. Between us let there be a covenant of peace and trade." And this message, innocent as it appeared on the surface, was in truth a test. Genghis Khan was testing Sultan Muhammad, testing his wisdom, testing his self-restraint, testing his vision. And Sultan Muhammad failed the test. The Mongol trade caravan arrived at the city of Otrar on the Khwarazmian frontier. Its governor was a man named Inalchuk, or Khair Khan, as Sultan Muhammad himself had titled him, the Sultan's own maternal uncle. What exactly happened at Otrar? The sources differ on the details, but they agree on the outcome. Inalchuk accused the Mongol merchants of espionage and ordered them all killed and their goods seized. 450 merchants slaughtered. Genghis Khan immediately dispatched a diplomatic envoy of 3 men demanding the handover of Inalchuk for trial. Sultan Muhammad, rather than stepping back and averting catastrophe, had the Muslim envoy executed, shaved the heads of the 2 Mongol envoys, and sent them back to Genghis Khan. The historian Ibn al-Athir, in his chronicle Al-Kamil fi al-Tariq, describes this moment as the beginning of something the like of which had not been heard since God created Adam. He was right. Genghis Khan, according to the account transmitted by the historian Juvaini in his Tariq-i-Jahangushai, climbed a mountain alone and prayed to the supreme Mongol deity Tengri, then descended and told his commanders, "I did not want this war, but they forced my hand, and now I will give them what they asked for." Is this entirely true? Did Genghis Khan genuinely want peace? Some contemporary historians, such as Jack Weatherford in Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, lean toward the view that Genghis Khan was already searching for a pretext and that the provocation served him politically. But regardless of intentions, the outcome was one. Hell was coming. In the year 1219 AD, Genghis Khan set out with a force that Mongol sources estimate at 200,000 fighters, while some Islamic sources put the number higher still, though contemporary historians tend toward a more conservative estimate of between 150,000 and 220,000. This army was not merely a number, it was an integrated system. The Mongols divided their force for the first time in history into 4 offensive axes, the first under Jebe Moyan to divert attention and deceive the enemy about the direction of the main assault, the second under Ogedeyi, son of Genghis, to strike Otrar and exact revenge, the third under Jochi to seize the regions of the Sir Darya, the fourth, the most dangerous and consequential, under Genghis Khan himself alongside his son Tolui, for something no one had imagined. What no one had imagined was this: while all the Khwarazmian armies stood deployed, waiting for an assault on the eastern frontiers along the Sir Darya, Genghis Khan resolved to cross the Kizilkum Desert, which everyone considered impassable, and appear suddenly from the direction no one expected. How did Genghis Khan know the desert could be crossed? Historians generally believe that his vast intelligence network, built through merchants and informants, furnished him with precise knowledge of hidden routes. Sultan Mehmed, for his part, made what would prove to be the most catastrophic strategic decision in the region's history. He chose to distribute his army across the cities rather than concentrate it into a single striking force. Why? Some historians argue he feared for his throne, that granting his commanders large independent armies was a risk he could not take. The historian Rashid al-Din Fadlallah, in his Jami al-Tawarikh, writes that Sultan Muhammad suffered from deep mistrust of his senior commanders following earlier disputes. Among those commanders was a man named Timur Malik, who would later become one of the rarest heroes of the resistance. The practical consequence of this decision, the vast Khwarazmian army, hundreds of thousands of fighters, was scattered across garrisons in distant cities, unable to relieve one another, none holding sufficient strength to stand against the Mongol army when united. And so, with a single decision, Sultan Muhammad transformed his numerical advantage, if it ever was one, into a structural catastrophe. The destruction began at Otrar. Ogedei and Chagatai besieged it for 5 full months, 5 months of stubborn resistance. And when it finally fell, the fate of Inalchuk, the city's governor who had ignited it all, was to have molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a precise Mongol reckoning. Then came the turn of Khujand. Its defender was Timur Melek, one of the most gifted of the Khwarazmian commanders. When he realized he could not hold, Timur Melek devised a solution no one else had conceived. He loaded his soldiers onto boats on the Sir Darya and withdrew across the river under a hail of Mongol arrows. The Mongols attempted to cut off his escape by blocking the river with their own vessels. Timur Melek tore through them. He broke the cordon and fled. That retreat, for all its bitterness, was a heroic triumph of military tactics. Timur Melek would later join Jalal al-Din and become one of his most distinguished men. Then came Bukhara. Bukhara, the city of scholarship and jurisprudence, fell faster than anyone had imagined. Part of the garrison fled under cover of night. Those who remained resisted from within the citadel. The citadel was burned. Genghis Khan entered the Grand Mosque of Bukhara, according to Juvaini's account, climbed the pulpit, and addressed the people gathered before him. "O people, know that I am the punishment of God. Had you not committed great sins, God would not have sent upon you one such as me." Bukhara was burned and later rebuilt, but it never again became what it had been. Then came the turn of Samarkand, capital of culture, jewel of Central Asia. Samarkand, whose people said that paradise had descended upon it to earth. It held for days. Then part of its garrison and some of its religious leaders surrendered. It fell. It was plundered. Part of it was burned, but it was not wholly destroyed, for Genghis Khan wished to preserve it as a center of trade. 110,000 craftsmen, weavers, and scholars were sent to Mongolia as skilled slaves. And the rest? They were cast out into the open from every direction. As for Merv, that legendary city, it fell at the hands of Tolu, son of Genghis, and what took place there was something different. Yaqut al-Hamawi records in his Mujam al-Buldan that he had visited Merv before the invasion and witnessed its splendor. The sources recount that Tolu ordered the population counted, then began the killing systematically. The figures cited by Muslim historians, 1,200,000 dead, are a matter of considerable academic debate. But what is beyond dispute is that the city was annihilated and that its human losses were catastrophic by any measure. And in the midst of all this, Sultan Mehmed of Khwarazm was running. This is the most agonizing scene in the story of Sultan Mehmed, a man who had been titled the Second Alexander, fleeing before the Mongols from city to city. Genghis Khan sent two of his most brilliant commanders in pursuit, Jeb Noyan and Subutai Bahadur, described by the American historian Timothy May in his work The Mongol Empire as perhaps the greatest cavalry commanders in history. They chased Sultan Mehmed across thousands of miles, from Khorasan to Mazandaran to Gilan to Tabaristan. The Sultan would arrive in a city and abandon it hours before the Mongols appeared. Once he reached Nishapur, he left. Once he took refuge in Isfarain, they followed. In the end, Sultan Mehmed II arrived at a small island in the Caspian Sea, and there, alone, ill, without an army, without royal dignity, without anything, died the Sultan who had once been the Second Alexander. He died in the closing months of the year 1220 AD. Ibn al-Athir writes in words that still send a chill through the ages. For years I was reluctant to record this event, so grave did I find it, advancing with one foot and retreating with the other. For who could bear to write the obituary of Islam and the Muslims? But Sultan Mehmed had left behind a son who resembled him in nothing. His name was Jalal al-Din. Before we follow the events forward, we need to understand who Jalal al-Din was. Jalal al-Din Mingburnu, his full name being Ala ad-Din Jalal al-Din Abu al-Fat Mingburnu, was born to one of Sultan Muhammad's Turkish mothers, and this was precisely the source of a long-standing dispute. His mother was not considered of noble origin in the eyes of Sultan Muhammad's own mother, Terkin Khatun, who favored another son whose mother was of higher lineage. But Jalal al-Din possessed what lineage cannot bestow: genuine courage on the field of battle, a charisma that made soldiers follow him toward death with a smile, and an absolute refusal, instinctive and principled, to entertain the idea of surrender. Even before the Mongol invasion, Jalal al-Din was known among soldiers as the fighting prince, the prince who led from the front, not from the rear. When the Khwarazmian Empire began to collapse, when his father began to flee, Jalal al-Din began to search for the battle, not as an escape from defeat, but as a search for a path to victory. The primary source on Jalal al-Din's life is the work Sirat al-Sultan Jalal al-Din Mingburnu by the historian al-Nasawi, Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Nasawi, Jalal al-Din's personal secretary, who lived alongside him, accompanied him, and wrote about him as an eyewitness. This work is considered the foremost and most precise account of Jalal al-Din, though al-Nasawi was an admirer and may have added some luster to the portrait. But what multiple sources confirm, including Mongol sources such as The Secret History of the Mongols, is that Jalal al-Din's courage was real, not merely transmitted legend. It was heroism documented by battles. Jalal al-Din reached the region of Ghazna in present-day Afghanistan. He gathered what soldiers he could, remnants of the retreating Khwarazmian army, Afghan fighters from the Gilji tribe, and surviving Khwarazmian garrisons. With him also was the man we met earlier, Timur Melik, the hero of Hujand. In the early months of 1221 AD, the Battle of Parwan was fought near the city of Baghlan in present-day Afghanistan. Genghis Khan dispatched one of his commanders. The sources differ on his name, some identifying him as Shigi Kutuku, at the head of a Mongol force to discipline this defiant prince. What happened at Parwan, Genghis Khan had not expected. Jalal al-Din, after studying the terrain, chose a position in a mountain pass that neutralized the Mongols' greatest advantage, the sweeping mobility of their cavalry. He arrayed his men in a manner that forced the Mongols to fight in a constricted space, and when the Mongols attacked, he met them with a coordinated counter-assault. He broke the Mongols, not a retreat, a genuine rout. The Mongol commander was killed or fled, the sources differ, and his army withdrew. This was, as historians note, one of the first clear battlefield defeats suffered by the Mongols in their campaign against Khwarezm. For Genghis Khan, it struck like a thunderbolt. The victory at Parwan drew thousands of new fighters to Jalal al-Din's banner. People wanted to believe the Mongols could be beaten, and Jalal al-Din had proven it. But the victory ignited, in history's familiar tragedy, the seed of the next defeat. The Khwarazmian commanders quarreled over the division of spoils. They argued, some withdrew, part of the army melted away. And when Genghis Khan learned of Parwan, he set aside everything else and came himself. This is the heart of the documentary. This is the moment where history pauses and reconsiders. November 1221 AD. Jalal al-Din and his exhausted army, which al-Nasawi estimates at 30,000, though the figures in sources of that era must be treated with caution, arrived at the banks of the Indus River in the region known today as Pakistan. They were attempting to cross into India to seek refuge with the Ghurid or Delhi Sultan. But preparing a crossing takes time, and time was not available. Genghis Khan arrived before Jalal al-Din could complete the crossing. Jalal al-Din faced two choices: either abandon the army and flee alone across the river, as many kings throughout history had done in similar straits, or fight. He chose to fight and placed the Indus at his back. This choice, a river behind him, a Mongol army before him, is what made Jalal al-Din a legend. Ancient military tradition held that placing a river or natural obstacle at your back was military madness, but Jalal al-Din reasoned differently. No room to retreat means every soldier fights to his last breath. The river protects his rear. The Mongols cannot encircle him from behind. Everything will be decided here. The battle began. Genghis Khan drove his forces in from 3 axes. Jalal al-Din held, and when he saw his left flank beginning to crumble, he personally led, sword in hand, a charge against the Mongol center. Juvaini writes in his Tarikh-i-Jahangushai that Jalal al-Din broke the center twice, but the numbers were too vast to be broken. Both flanks collapsed. The Khwarazmian army was surrounded. And then came the moment that etched Jalal al-Din's image into historical memory forever. When he understood the battle was lost, he did not surrender. He stripped off his armor to lighten himself, seized his banner, and spurred his horse into the Indus. He crossed the river under a torrent of Mongol arrows and reached the other bank. And the scene that historians transmit of Genghis Khan standing on the bank watching this unfold. Genghis Khan stood, pointed toward Jalal al-Din as he swam, and said to his sons, "This is the one who deserves to have a father like that." This sentence appears in multiple sources, most prominently Juvaini, al-Nasawi, and Rashid al-Din. It is generally held that Genghis Khan said it, or something close to it, for the man, despite his battlefield ferocity, genuinely admired true courage in his enemy. Genghis Khan ordered that Jalal al-Din not be pursued once he had crossed. Some historians say he was moved by admiration. Others say the river made immediate pursuit impossible. On the far bank of the Indus, Jalal al-Din reached India, nearly alone. He had lost his battle, but he had preserved something more important than the battle. He had preserved the idea that resistance was possible. In India, Jalal al-Din found himself in a strange position, a great warrior without a state, a prince without a land, a man whom neighboring kings tried in turn to absorb, to contain, and to fight. He remained in India for roughly 3 years. He fought Sultan Nasr al-Din Qabacha, the ruler of Sindh, and defeated him. He fought the Delhi sultans and imposed his military presence. But India was not his homeland, and Genghis Khan had withdrawn from India for reasons of logistics, climate, and the difficulty of expanding southward, which meant the road back had become, in theory, open. Jalal al-Din returned through Persia, not the return of a conqueror, but the return of a builder. And what he accomplished in the years that followed, 1224 to 1230 AD, stands as one of the most historically contested achievements among scholars. In roughly 6 years, he reclaimed control of Kerman, defeated the Ghurid Turks at Isfahan, entered Azerbaijan and established himself there, imposed his authority over part of Georgia and broke a Georgian army, confronted the Ismailis in the mountains, and besieged Tiflis. It appeared as though Jalal al-Din was attempting to forge a new empire out of nothing. But the real problem was not the Mongols. It came from within. Here, history becomes more complex and less clear. And here, Jalal al-Din, the historical figure, becomes more of a subject of debate. Jalal al-Din possessed enough to build an anti-Mongol coalition. Georgia was exhausted from the Mongol invasion and searching for allies. Some of the Islamic principalities in the Jazira and Azerbaijan were prepared to cooperate. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, al-Nasir li-Din Allah and then al-Mustansir, watched with growing anxiety. But rather than building alliances, Jalal al-Din was making war on everyone. He attacked the Georgians, despite their being victims of the Mongols just as he was. He raided and seized Tabriz. He devastated part of Aklat in a grueling battle against the Ayyubid rulers. Ibn Wasil writes in his Mufarij al-Qurub that people regarded Jalal al-Din with conflicted eyes. They saw in him the hero and the hope, and at the same time saw in him a danger that could not be calculated. The modern historian, Angus Stewart, in specialized studies on Jalal al-Din, describes him as a first-rate strategic commander at the level of the battlefield, but one who lacked the political vision needed to build a lasting coalition. And this contradiction, exceptional courage set against political deficiency, is what makes Jalal al-Din a tragic figure in the classical sense. He had the talent, he had the will, but his fate was larger than his capacity to contend with it. Let us pause here for a moment, because history is not a Hollywood film, and Genghis Khan is not simply a monster in black and white. Genghis Khan was a rare historical phenomenon, a warrior, an organizational thinker, and a political mind all at once. On the question of brutality, yes, it was immense. The demographic historian J.D. Durand estimates that the population of present-day Iran fell by between 50% and 70% during the Mongol period. And recent studies by climate scientists suggest the devastation was so vast that dense forests grew over regions that had once been cultivated, absorbing quantities of carbon dioxide that measurably affected the climate. But Genghis Khan was also the first to establish the principle of free trade across an empire, the first to issue laws against the robbery of merchants, the first to grant formal religious freedom within his domain, the first to build the rapid postal relay system, the Yam, which was the wonder of its age. Jack Weatherford, in Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, argues that the Mongol impact on the spread of trade, knowledge, and technology was greater than most people imagine. This thesis is contested among historians, but it is not without evidence. What drove Genghis Khan at the personal level? The Secret History of the Mongols, a Mongol document written years after his death, portrays a man who believed deeply that Tengri, the eternal sky, had sent him for a purpose. He was not religious in the conventional sense, but he believed in his destiny. And that belief in destiny, in a man of such capacities, was a combination of extraordinary danger. This is a question historians have been asking for 8 centuries. How could an empire of this magnitude, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, fortified cities, a history of victories, collapse in 3 years? The answers are multiple, and each completes the others. First, a structural flaw in the architecture of the Khwarazmian state. The empire had been built with breathtaking speed through military expansion, but that expansion was never accompanied by the cultivation of genuine loyalty among local populations. Many Khwarazmian cities had lived under Khwarazmian rule for only a few decades. There were no deep roots that would make people fight to the death for their sultan. Second, the decision to fortify rather than confront. As we have described, the decision to distribute the army across cities was catastrophic. The historian René Grousset, in The Empire of the Steppes, calls it the greatest strategic error in the history of Islamic Central Asia. Third, sophisticated Mongol psychological warfare. The Mongols were masters of psychological warfare. They would deliberately release survivors from cities they had destroyed, allowing them to flee, so that these survivors would carry the news of the devastation to the next city. The approaching city would thus already know what had befallen the last one, and its inhabitants were gripped by terror before the Mongols even arrived. This is documented in the secret history of the Mongols and in the writings of Juvayni. Fifth, an intelligence network without parallel. Before any major assault, the Mongols already knew the maps of cities, the locations of water sources, the movements of armies, the names of commanders and their temperaments. This network of merchants and informants had been built over years. Sixth, the Mongol army as an integrated system. The Mongol army was not merely brave cavalry. They had Chinese siege engineers, specialists in cutting off cities' water supplies, a logistical system that allowed rapid movement across vast distances, and a rare tactical flexibility. Mongol commanders were granted broad authority to make decisions in the field.
In 1227 AD, Genghis Khan was leading a campaign against the Western Xia kingdom in China when illness struck him. The sources differ on its nature. It is said he fell from his horse on a hunting expedition. It is said he was seized by a severe fever. It is said he knew he was dying, but insisted on seeing the campaign through. In August 1227 AD, Genghis Khan died, aged somewhere around 61 or 65. The sources differ on his birth date. He was buried in a location that has remained secret to this day. He is said to have ordered his grave concealed, that all who participated in his burial were killed to ensure the secret held, that rivers were diverted over the site. To this day, the grave of Genghis Khan has never been found. The last words attributed to him, according to the secret history of the Mongols, were a testament to his sons. If you wish to end in grace what you have begun, do not be divided. They did not listen. A few months after the death of Genghis Khan, Jalal al-Din faced the Mongol threat once more. The Mongol armies had not ended with their commander's death. If anything, they were more organized under Ogedei, who had succeeded his father. In 1230 AD, the Mongols shattered Jalal al-Din's army in Azerbaijan. His forces scattered. Most of his princes abandoned him. Jalal al-Din found himself once again in the position of 1221, alone, hunted, without an army. He fled toward the mountains of Kurdistan in Diyarbakir, and there, in circumstances that remain historically disputed, he was killed. The sources differ on the manner of his death. Some say he was killed by local Kurds in an act of vengeance or robbery. Some say he was killed by Mongol agents, and some say the Mongols themselves pursued and killed him. Al-Nasawi, his personal secretary, had parted from him some months before the end. He did not witness it, but he wrote of it years later in a tone of grief that no ear could mistake. Jalal al-Din died in 1231 AD. He was in all likelihood no older than 45. After the death of Jalal al-Din, there was no longer any organized Islamic power standing against the Mongols in this part of the world. In 1258 AD, Mongol forces invaded Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim, the last of the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad, was killed, and the Abbasid Caliphate's system came to an end in its very heart. The direct line between the massacre at Otrar and the fall of Baghdad is not a metaphor. It is a historical line that can be drawn. But history does not end with destruction. In 1260 AD, less than 3 decades after the death of Jalal al-Din, the Mongols met at Ain Jalut in Palestine, the army of the Egyptian Mamluks, led by Saif al-Din Qutuz and Rukan al-Din Baibars, and they were defeated. Did Jalal al-Din's resistance play a role in this? Not in any direct sense, but the historian Rida Nur and others argue that Jalal al-Din's years of resistance wore down the Mongol momentum in the region, consumed vast human and logistical resources, and gave neighboring states time to breathe and rebuild. Jalal al-Din was not the cause of the Mongol defeat, but he may have been one of the factors that made their defeat possible later.
How do we read this story today? Jalal al-Din in collective memory. In Azerbaijan, he is a national hero. In Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, he is remembered as a symbol of resistance. Novels have been written about him, dramatic works produced in his name. The historian Anne Lambton, in her studies of Persian and Iranian history, describes him as a model of the warrior prince who preferred honor to survival. Genghis Khan in collective memory. In Mongolia, he is the founding father of the state. His name graces the airport, the currency, the banknotes. His colossal statue stands on the banks of the Toul River. In China, Russia, and Iran, he remains a complex mixture of terror and admiration. The more important question for historians today is not who won or who lost. The question is, what do we do with history when it is this complex, this painful? Genghis Khan may have caused more deaths than any individual in history, directly or indirectly, but he also contributed to connecting cultures, trade routes, and ideas across continents. Jalal al-Din resisted in the name of Islam, civilization, and throne, but he also ignited peripheral wars against potential allies and squandered golden opportunities for unity. History does not favor pure heroes or pure villains. It favors real human beings in moments that exceed all measure.